Hey guys, Youngblood with you, and what I wanted to do today was actually speculate a little bit with you all, specifically regarding the Polaris. Now, the Polaris is the Corvette that's supposed to be coming out for concept sale, and the reason we're talking about it is, one, it was actually mentioned in a lore post that came out yesterday. Not a whole lot of detail about it, but it was more than we've seen in a while, and as well as Ben confirming on Ben's Day with Nicole D'Angelo, stating that the Polaris is very, very likely to be on concept sale during CitizenCon, which is something I actually kind of predicted in the CitizenCon predictions video. So with that being said, there's a couple different ways that I think CIG can take this ship, and I'm not really sure which one's going to be the ship we get at the end of the day, and we won't really know for a little while. But I think when we start talking about Corvettes, the real intended role of a Corvette, and it varies depending on what military you're looking at, or what different application or game you're actually looking at. So it's hard to say confidently, but in my mind, a Corvette's really a faster, larger ship. It's designed to either protect other capital ships or to kind of help you, engage other capital ships. It's not a huge threat. It's not a capital ship killer, at least by itself. But it's a faster, smaller, large ship that's going to be capable of either kind of creating an area denial situation or kind of a larger, faster attack craft. So when we start talking about the possibility of area denial, I think it's going to be, if it goes this route, a fast ship for its size. I think that speed is going to be, more of a focus because it's going to need to get into locations to help protect other vehicles a little bit better. So I think fast in a straight line is a high probability. I think a ship like this is also going to be dotted with turrets. Now, whether that's just the typical laser turrets that we've seen today, or maybe there's the introduction of some sort of a flak turret, almost like we've seen in like the Battlestar series. I think its overall purpose, though, is to be able to provide almost a bubble of protection against people from actually coming in. So if you've got a really important ship that you need to protect, having a Corvette around like the Polaris, if it is this type of ship, is going to help ward off different people that are coming in to engage you. I think in order to help facilitate the usage of those turrets, it's probably going to not necessarily be a real a real impressive a ship as far as agility is concerned, but I think it would probably need to have a decent role to help kind of keep those primary guns on target and provide the necessary protection. And then finally, I think it could also end up having maybe like missile batteries that are going to be designed to kind of help fight off like the faster fighters that turrets are going to have a hard time with. I think it's also going to be able to use some sort of weaponry to help kind of deal with bombers that are coming in. So a ship like this would probably have decent armor. I'm not necessarily thinking it would be impressive armor, primarily because if you're trying to keep things away, the focus is more on that bubble of protection as opposed to actual durability of your ship. But I could see it being kind of a primarily, threat against things like a long-range bomber or other capital ships. If a Polaris gets in the line of sight of an Idris using a railgun, it's probably going to have a very, very bad day. The flip side of that would be if it's a larger, faster attack craft, where it's really designed to engage other large vessels and sometimes even doing that in a group to kind of overwhelm the target. So if it ends up being that approach, I see this with more forward-facing weaponry than turrets. Less of a focus on that bubble of denial and more of a focus on engaging the target that's in front of you. So maybe on the front of this ship, we see something like 4 to 6 size 5 or 6 type weapons that actually is able to pack a pretty good punch on, an inbound approach. And then there's also the possibility of it actually having torpedoes, which was mentioned by the developers. Now, I think a little bit the torpedoes are kind of a weird addition because it kind of creates this weird hybrid role of a ship. So I'm not necessarily sold, even though it was mentioned by the developers, that they're going to end up going that route. However, it does provide an interesting dynamic and kind of a large ship that we haven't really seen before if it ends up having that. I'm actually hoping that it doesn't go the torpedo route unless they're really just supplementary to a nice forward-facing weapon set. Just because until we actually see a really strong system for torpedoes working effectively and missiles working effectively, I have some doubts in that regard, especially with how effective countermeasures are at this point. Now, if you're talking about a really large fleet battle, it may be hard to keep track of all the different targets that are engaging you, and you may see a missile warning pop up and not be as concerned, and it turns out to be a torpedo. But there are some concerns regarding that. I think this would need to be a pretty agile ship. Less of a focus on speed, but more of a focus on agility, because if you need to keep your forward-facing weapons on target, you need to be able to adjust your ship accordingly. Now, it doesn't need to be super agile. I'm not expecting it to be able to breakdance with a fighter, but it should be able to keep up with a slower target like an Idris and be able to keep them in their sights while trying to stay out of the main threat, being like the railgun. I think as far as speed is concerned, it's probably fast enough to not let other capital ships end up escaping, but it's going to be too slow to keep up with fighters or bombers. I think it ends up having good shielding to help facilitate inbound attacks, but the major concern for a ship in this category, at least in my mind, would be being overwhelmed by fighters, because there's going to be more blind spots. You have less turret coverage, which means that if we end up with this larger attack craft type of Polaris, then we may end up needing to be more reliant on bringing escorts along to help protect that ship, even though it's an attack vehicle in itself. So those are the two different directions I could see them going. I could be way off. This is just Youngblood's impression today. But I think we're going to find out pretty soon. The other area that's really gray right now that I think is a wide range of opinions is regarding the price of this ship. I think realistically we could see it being anywhere between $500 and $1,000. Now, the Idris was initially a Corvette, and it was initially sold for $1,000 or $1,250, and it's replacing that role. So you could look at it and say, well, if the Corvette was $1,000, and now this is a Corvette, then this should be $1,000. But the difference is the Idris pricing hasn't really changed to this point. Now, when it ends up being live, if it's ever sold again, we may end up seeing the Idris pricing go up because of the Polaris being in the game, as well as maybe whenever the Idris becomes hangar ready. But if the price gets too high on the Polaris and the Idris pricing doesn't change, what's preventing people from just getting an Idris? Now, obviously, it's not for sale all the time, and there's going to be other factors, like crew costs are going to be huge on an Idris as compared to a Polaris. A Polaris is going to be probably 110 to 140 meters long, so when we start talking about that, it's probably a 10 to 15 man craft as opposed to like a 25 to 30 man craft, which is a big difference. And then, like we talked about in the capital ship problem video, the bigger the ship, the more possibility to sustain damage, and then like fuel cost, repairs, rearming, all of those things are going to be very expensive. So there's different reasons why you would choose the slightly cheaper Polaris over the Idris, even if they're close in price, but it's hard to really say. One thing that may kind of work in our favor if we want to see this ship a little bit cheaper would be the lore article on the Comlink yesterday that really suggested a focus on both military and militia. And the militia is really comprised of civilians that are really trying to protect what they love, what they represent, so their homes and their interests and those types of things. They're not necessarily a military or like a PMC type group. So if we're talking about suggested civilian usage, then there's always going to be the possibility of a lower price tag, which may open up opportunities for non-military people to actually afford purchasing one. And then I guess the final thing there is this is an RSI ship. It's not an Aegis ship. It's not an Anvil ship. So when we start talking about this as a capital ship and RSI ships tend to be pretty reasonable in price compared to something like the Anvil ships, because the Anvil is always military spec. They tend to be more expensive overall. And even though this is military spec, I think we could end up seeing it be a more realistic price. Again, wild speculation. If I had to put my dollar amount on it, I'm probably going to split the middle and say this is going to be $700 to $750. But we could be surprised one way or another. And then somebody was asking me in one of the comments of my videos, they were asking if I thought this was going to be a limited sale, or I guess limited in the number of holes that are actually available. My gut says no. The community tend to really push back when that happens. If they say there's only going to be 1,000 or 2,000 available for sale, it's really hard for people to get those. There's the F5 battles just hitting refresh. There's also the issues with time zones when the sales actually go live. I just don't see it happening as a limited time sale. I could see them doing a really short sale, like 2 to 3 days as compared to the 10 days that we normally get, but I don't think we're going to see it be like 2,000 of these are available for sale. So those are kind of my hunches and my impressions about the different directions they could take this ship. I'd love to know what you guys think, because talking Polaris right now is probably my favorite topic. So please let me know in the comments what you think it's going to be, what you think the price tag is, and how many you think are going to be up for sale if it is going to be limited. Otherwise, I think we'll be finding out in about 2 weeks at CitizenCon, and we don't have to wait too much longer to get the information. So hopefully that helps. If you guys have been wondering about the Polaris, let me know if you have questions. Have yourselves a wonderful day, and take care.